Um, thank you as well. I was listening to Patricia's contribution now, and it was a heartfelt feeling. This the sense that we lose people who are very valued, and how best we should appreciate them, remember them, and remembering everybody. And I do apologise, conference, for not being with you today. I was with you in Nottingham last year, and it was very interesting indeed. It was actually a matter in the constituency here, the largest town prior to the expanding the constituencies was Blaenau Festiniog. And this was an event to work with community groups to prevent suicide, because Blaenau Festiniog had been identified as a location of concern by, would you believe it, the Trunk Roads Agency, the number of suicides you've had there. And why I thought I would mention this with you, as well as apologising if I'm not with you, is that I picked up a depressing statistic there in the meeting that 70% of suicides follow contact with the criminal justice system, be that as a perpetrator or as a victim. And it made me think also that I'll be speaking to you this afternoon, and how important your role in stopping these tragedies for so many families. So thank you very much indeed for the invitation. Since this time last year in Nottingham, it seems that so much, and in some ways so very little, has changed. And much of the longed for change now seems to be in potentia rather than actually tangible. But nonetheless, significantly, after 14 years of Conservative chaos, we now have a new Labour UK government in charge. And I think that sense of change, although we seamlessly look to how that actually affects and the way that we can serve in our role to best effect, there is a sense, thank God for the change. But we have 888,350 people in prison in England and Wales at the end of August. The number of people released on parole and then recalled is up 72% since 2019. And the remand population is at the, and I quote, highest level for the last 50 years in June. Radical change is absolutely critical. But a new government provides hope, that critical substance, that change is possible. And there has been some good news already. The Secretary of State and Lord Chancellor Shabana Mahmood's announcement of a Women's Justice Board focused on early intervention and alternatives to prison for women, and it's very much welcomed. But this has to be matched by adequate funding and investment, and we await the budget at the end of this month. This, of course, is important. The first tranche of the government's STS 40 scheme took place on the 10th of September, and it was evidently not matched by adequate funding and investment. And I know that Napo warned of the risks involved with STS 40. Probation staff had to do what would be a month's worth of complex work in a matter of weeks. Now, the formidable Tanya Bassett told us that some of you were informed that serious offenders would be among the released prisoners only a week before they came out a month ago. And Tanya also made it crystal clear that only giving probation officers a few days to prepare for the release of people who may be serious offenders would and will inevitably lead to increased recall numbers. Now, the Chief Inspector of Probation, Martin Jones, also said that the significant increase in releases will inevitably lead to an increased risk of recall and reoffending, and that there are already too few staff managing too many cases. You know all that, of course. You, Napo, have been saying this for years. And it's vital that lessons are learnt before the next cohort of prisoners are released, I think it would be within less than a month's time. It's crucial that workload is matched by adequate funding and resources. And this goes a long way to ensure good probation practice, which in turn helps ensure effective rehabilitation, reduces reoffending, and ensures the welfare of victims and the wider public. This must, of course, be done ahead of the 22nd of October to avoid tragic consequences. And it's too late to avoid some of those consequences for the September tranche, people who were released who weren't even eligible to be on the STS 40 scheme. Not every victim and survivor even knew that their perpetrator was due to be released, and Serco didn't ensure that electronic tagging systems were fitted to everyone that required one. And I was thinking, when I was preparing this speech for you today, it is, of course, and I'm sure others have touched on this or will do in the conference, it's 10 years since transforming rehabilitation. And the lessons, well, failed privatisation of services crucial to rehabilitation and public protection. It's clear, in all honesty, that they haven't yet been learnt to actually be felt on the coalface, on the front. While privatised probation is consigned to the dustbin of history, the reality on the ground is that long-term disruption remains, with the loss of staff continuing to plague the service. The recruitment of over 1,000 additional trainee probation officers by March 2025 is, of course, a welcome announcement, but it won't solve these deep-rooted problems overnight. Nor is this new investment in the first place, but rather a reprioritisation of resources. Again, in a service that has seen a 40% cut since 2010, I think that's hearing those words, the reprioritisation of resources, will be a source of concern. The excessive chronic staff shortages, excessive workloads, poor morale, exactly the issues Napo members have shared with me during my tenure as the co-chair of the Justice Union's parliamentary group, will, unless there's a serious think and real government investment, they will continue. What we need is more sustainable solutions to the crisis across the justice system. Moving the crisis within our prisons towards rehabilitative services by way of schemes such as ST40 is not an effective long-term response as it stands. Instead, I know Napo National Chair has called for longer-term strategies to combat prison overcrowding, including a wholesale review into short-term sentences. I wholly agree. The fact is that the probation service is already under significant stress. According to the Chief Inspector of Probation, around 2/3 of inspected cases fall short of standards to keep people safe. 97% of probation delivery units fell below standards of good practice, and Martin Jones suspects that all the 12 England and Wales probation regions are struggling to cope with cases. In fact, the Chief Inspector has proposed some potential suggestions to alleviate some of these pressures, such as reducing the service's caseload by up to 40,000 offenders and potentially allowing youth justice services to monitor 18 to 21-year-olds. NAPO's campaigns provide many examples of how the system can be made better, from increased funding, workloads that allow effective risk management and rehabilitation, and greater protection for staff. Also, by separating probation from the civil service and returning it to local control. Last year, the outgoing Chief Inspector called for an independent review of whether the service should return to local control, saying that reunification, as it was unlikely to be a silver bullet, which I think you're probably experiencing and agree. He said that probation is primarily a locally delivered service, and that local leaders need the freedom and flexibility to adapt to specific localised circumstances. And this is a key reason why the devolution of probation across the nation's regions could really be successful. A localised service independent from the prison service, one that's based in and works for its local community and in partnership with local partners, the police, health trusts, social services. And of course, as you will know that I will always say when I get the opportunity, many of these crucial rehabilitative services are already devolved in Wales, thus making the case for devolution all the stronger. Because it's only through real joined up synchronization across these different levers that we can address systematic issues hindering both effective rehabilitation and the safety and welfare of victims, survivors, and their families. And this becomes harder to ignore when faced with tragic events such as those at HMP Park this year, where the impacts of Welsh Justice's jagged edge on prisoner welfare has been compounded by the effects of private prison provision. Just to turn now to the Justice Union's parliamentary group, and just a moment to say, interestingly, my former co-chair of the JUPG, Lord Fred Ponsonby, who was with me, I remember correctly, last year when we both addressed the conference, he's now not only the Minister for Family Courts, but he's also the Minister in the Lords for Human Rights and Devolution, which is going to mean that we'll probably have quite an interesting few conversations to come. But in all seriousness, what I hope is that his role with family courts will make a real difference to members here today. Having a minister who not only appreciates your work, but also understands the challenges you face can only be good. And I'm sure he will stand up for Napo members working in family courts and in probation too, as he did while a shadow minister in opposition. I also encourage delegates to read this year's parliamentary report, compiled by the brilliant and relentlessly enthusiastic Charlie Allen, who I know you'll actually be able to see in the face somewhere, probably with you in the hall there. And it provides a comprehensive record of Napo-related interventions and other parliamentary activities by Justice Union Parliamentary Group members and parliamentarians over the past year. And it just shows that many parliamentarians have joined Napo in your calls and ensure that they're heard loud and clear in both chambers and in select committees in Parliament. Now, to close, I said earlier, a new government holds promise and brings new opportunities for expert-led reform. Now is the time for the new Labour government to make that a reality. Now is the time for ministers to fully engage with probation professionals, listen to your calls and your concerns, and rebuild the probation service into the service which for so many of you is a vocation from the heart. Now, I know we shouldn't talk about vocation entirely in relation to public service, but I do know from having met you that this matters to you. Making a difference to people's lives, helping people to rebuild their lives matters to you. And what we need is the means to do that. A fully resourced probation service premised on community-based prevention and rehabilitation, safeguarding offenders, the public and staff, with manageable workloads so you can do this, and adequate pay that reflects the work you do. By the time I speak at next year's conference, and believe me, because I can't see you and all you can do is hear me, but please do invite me back next year if I am still co-chair. I hope this vital and well overdue reform will be well underway. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi conference. Thank you very much indeed.